Thank you very much. I want to say that this has been a wonderful week for me. It's wonderful always to be back, but everyone's been so nice, so kind. I came in late on a Monday, I guess it was a Monday, and Barbara Prunty, tired as she was, had food for me, and people stayed, and we talked about poets, and so I want to thank Wyatt, too, and the staff, the wonderful staff, and all of the people I know. And I am teaching with the wonderful John Casey, and we have a brilliant class. I feel very, very lucky. I'm going to be reading from a new novel called Prosperous Friends, and it's now has an editor, Elizabeth Schmitz at Grove. So I'm very happy. It's something I've been hoping for a long time. So I'm very happy. I'm going to read from the novel, this new novel. And I have cut it up some, trying to put things together, so it makes some sense. But I am going to start with the first chapter. This is from Prosperous Friends. Chapter is entitled Postdoc, London, 2002. The stone faces she saw on either side of the prior's door looked surprised. She always expected grotesque, but not so Ned. No, Ned Bourne was walking into the world with his arms open, whereas she suspected everything she knew about people came from looking at them through a window. Now there was Ned to take her to sacred places, to the Ship of the Fens, a cathedral in the marshes. They stood on the threshold of the prior's door and felt how much cooler it was, the stones, cool and wet. Feel, Ned said, and Isabel held out her hand and touched the wall, clammy as a toad's, but then think of all that had happened in this church. Come here, Ned said. He was braced in a corner in shadow. Here, he said when she was closer. Come here. Someone will see, she said, even as she leaned against him and he rustled up her skirt. Oh, my, Ned. Ned, skilled in astonishment as from the start. Really, she said, almost giving in to feeling, but not quite, almost, nearly, a familiar breach in the intimate scene. She could only act excited, which she surely knew, and in the drive back to London, slashing past what they had passed before, the slurry view was all she saw, nothing still or edged, but it was gone. Car turned in and paid for, day trip done. Let's go home, he said, and she looked up and saw he was far ahead. Why so fast? But Isabel Bourne caught up at the crosswalk and took hold of his hand and ran through the throbbing warning. A cold front or a damp front. In any case, a new front was coming in. The change for the worse and the weather chilled them. At home they drank soup and he sang aloud to her, the grave's a fine and private place. Night's disarray and rain and his disappointed face. What is it I can do for you, Isabel? What is it you need? Ned asked. If only she knew, but she never. Never? Don't act as if this is news, Ned, please. He took her hand and led her to bed in the cold ordeal of readying for bed, which was readying for something else, and she was not ready. Relax, he said, and he worked to help her relax, stroked, kissed, used his hands inventively until after a while he rubbed himself against her mouth, her wet mouth moving, and the electric feather that was her tongue. He could. That's good what you're doing, don't stop. And she didn't, and he was satisfied. But what can I do for you? If only there were something she could think of. Las Vegas, a summer ago. 2001, she was up for anything, no matter the small results. Early bird special, Tex-Mex fried. Las Vegas looked like Candyland, but the colorless sky was a desert, and it was hot, hot. She had never been to Nevada, never to Utah or Wyoming, a lot of states really, so they had meandered. Isabel Stark then, and the persuasively, all to everyone Ned born. How was it she was here with him now in London, but she was Isabel Bourne, changed and unchanged. Already she had seen so much with him, the orange canyons of Zion and Bryce, where they had looked up, silenced by slabs of righteous nature. In the weathering weather of Wyoming, a girl needed steams and cold cream every night. The mountains, yes, the Tetons, yes, spectacular, goes without saying, but flat stretches of fenced-off pale land made for bleak memories, not a tree or animal in sight, only carcasses twisted in barbed wire. Nothing? Ned asked, swinging away from her in the bed, seated at its edge, waiting for an answer that was no more than a smile at the sight of his muscled legs. She reached out and petted him. Whatever you're getting for yourself, get me some. On that road trip across the country, they had sussed out state specialties, but what were the English specialties? Toad in the hole, Cornish pasty, shepherd's pie. Ned had every intention of trying it all, bangers and mash, Stilton and port. In Minnesota, they had discovered the pies were custardy, meringued, but what had been served up in South Dakota? Had they driven through at night? She remembered seeing buffalo in dirty coats, slugging in the high grass, graceful, calm, as if eating were a kind of meditation. Ned came back to bed with crisps, a noisy snack and a salty, smiley pleasure, a pleasure to be in his company, although she was often out of his company, that he might work without distraction. He had a fellowship and a book he hoped to finish, and Isabel? Since the ashy collapse of the year before, she could not find a subject large enough. Arguments in kitchens and her parents' divorce. The time he almost left her, Ned, but she cried and cried. Ned and Isabel often talked of the event and other dilemmas of purpose and direction. "I'm not young," Isabel said, not a little surprised. All too often, a finger heavy on a key woke her so that she put the laptop on the floor and sat before a pond of whys. Discomfort might keep her awake, if not her subject. "I need a regular job when we get back," she said to herself, and then later to Ned, "I need a regular job when we get back to the States. I need something to do." Ned said, "Think of our time here as graduate school," no matter they had both just finished. But graduate school had been so jokey. She had honed skills in the thrift shops on Broadway, buying furred sweaters and looking like Twiggy. And her thesis, Isabel's stories, the criticisms from her classmates had been spiteful or silly. The meanest of them closed on upbeat notes. "Hope to read more." Really? Ned's critiques were smart. He hit on the weak spots in ways that didn't shame her. "So go out," he said. "Be courageous. See the city." She went to the theater first. Isabel had dividends enough to see the same production of The Seagull as often as she liked, and she was enamored of its desperate Nina. "How sweet it used to be, Kostya. Remember how bright and warm, how joyous and pure our lives were." Isabel had played Nina in a college production. "A man comes along by chance and, because he has nothing better to do, destroys her." On the day Isabel came back from the Seagull a second time, Isabel wrote her father to thank him for his generosity. In a postscript, she wrote, "Hello to Annabelle. I've never written my stepmother's name before," Isabel said. "For that matter, I've never written to thank my father. This is progress, wouldn't you say?" She fanned herself with the letter. "You're a kinder person, are you?" Ned said, with an English inflection so that it sounded like a question. The next day, in student-like spirit to be smart, at times smart, Vassar was her own doing, had nothing to do with her father's money, Isabel went on a day trip to Cambridge with the Blue Guide and its rundown of the colleges and their famous members, literary royalty. Milton had walked here. She unsettled herself with thoughts of sloughed-off skin on whatever had been touched. Maybe she would sit in some of Milton if she sat beneath the right tree, in the right place. England's trees and whoever met or dreamed, picnicked or loved beneath them were a wonder, the enormous reach of copper beeches, explosive heads, yews, chestnuts, limes, ginkgos, the dead oaks in Windsor Great Park were no less than God's sycorax in a moment of anguish. Might they not be released and made green again at some greater God's touch? Anointment was what she had sought. More than one visiting writer had said, what matters most is staying in the room. She fell asleep in the room. Ned said, "Fine to stay in the room, but not all the time. You have to live." That's why she was drinking ale in the oldest pub in Cambridge, once known as the Eagle and Child, now just the Eagle, with its RAF bar and plaques commemorating Watson and Crick, who drank here, talked, and thought. DNA, no small discovery. Isabel's great-grandfather on her father's side, Harley Chalmers Stark, came by fortune through the garment trade in Wall Street. He was good with numbers, but Isabel was just so-so. The DNA got diluted, mixed up. From Isabel's mother's side came Eleanor, Isabel's grandmother. She wrote children's books. Her first and most popular book was published by a small press in Ohio, Soap Bubbles for Christmas. Remembering this book and its maker did not inspire confidence. Isabel's father went to Harvard, but her mother studied French in a women's college that went out of business in 1982. Her mother was embarrassed of her education, saying, "My education, such as it was." Her mother did not inspire confidence. Why couldn't her mother have been an authority on something? A guy in the poetry division, August Mueller, had criticized Isabel for romanticizing the lives of artists. Artists were largely ignored, he scoffed, even if well-funded, a group largely relevant only to themselves. One unexpectedly hot afternoon, she persuaded Ned to walk through Highgate Cemetery, thinking it would make for the coolest exercise, reinvigorating, but it brought no extended relief. Ned complained, better to be at home, at least there he could work. She was looking at the faithful mastiff at the foot of the pugilist's grave when the midget father appeared out of nowhere, an old apple face on a little body, followed by a midget boy with hair like a cap pulled low. After that, Ned swore off cemeteries. "I've got an idea," Ned said. Limehouse, when just a look could inspire anything. Anything? "How do you like this?" "Yeah, well, no, not exactly." "How about this?" "Yes, this, a little." "This? No, that hurts. That really hurts, Ned." Afterward, the only thing he could say was he wanted to give her pleasure. "Not that way, you don't." "Why is it so important to you?" Isabel asked. I think if you knew the sensation, you'd want to have it more often. A certain kind of woman, coarsely attractive, sensual, damp, bad skin, invariably told Isabel that Ned looked like an old boyfriend. Now, for instance, Sue Rasmussen was telling her how Ned looked just like this guy she knew back home in the States. Sue Rasmussen was talking about this guy, and as there was nothing expected of her in the conversation, Isabel turned away. Of course, Isabel forgave Sue Rasmussen. Sue Rasmussen was only experiencing what she too knew, seeing Ned. He could quite literally stop conversation. Then again, Sue Rasmussen was a willful, aggressive, ugly woman. Ned looks like this guy, I know. Who would believe it? Who cared? You don't have to come to these parties, Isabel. Ned at her ear. Once, at just such a party, people interested in Ned, friends with friends of Ned, Isabel overheard Ned saying how lucky he was to look across at her every morning. Did she really want to miss out on Ned making deep impressions? Let's just try this. I don't want to. Let's. No. Why don't you just give in to what I can do for you? Most guys would. His idea had to do with women. Why did it surprise her? He had said as much before. Pick anyone in the theater was Ned's suggestion between acts. The maids. Very chilly. When she didn't pick, he did, and his choice alarmed her, but later she shut her eyes and imagined, even as Ned inventively opened her with his fingers and his tongue, imagined he was working on the young woman in the orchestra seat 2 rows ahead of them, a dark head of crimped hair that caught the light and looked wet. Isabel needed to touch it to know what it was about the wet hair on the small, hard head between her legs. It was the girl's fingers Isabel held, not his. You were close, I thought. I thought too. But she thought a lot of things. She thought a girl who wore fishnet stockings and leather skirts would be discreet. Who was she kidding? G had an earring in her eyebrow. Her hair was the color of mud and dense. Her breasts were no more than red cones. Her body was tough, but her reactions to dogs, milk, soap, cocoa were as goggly as her eyes. G was young. She missed camp. S'mores, Isabel had said. I know all about them. How did you meet this G? Ned asked. How did we meet? We met here at the National Portrait Gallery. I was browsing in the gift shop. I was waiting for you then, too. She just started talking to me about her favorite portraits. I don't remember now. Besides, you're late, Ned. I'm sorry. It's all right. He gave her the postcard G had sent of a naked old woman with a slab of paint for a pubis. The gray stroke could have been a headstone. On the back of the card, in a hand hard to read, was the message, "Flesh is the reason why oil painting was developed. De Kooning. When are you going to let me do you?" Isabel stood in front of Mary Wollstonecraft. The woman's forehead was serenely unlined, although hadn't Godwin sullied her reputation? Fuck Godwin. Why didn't you tell me? I'm telling you now. We met. It was nothing. Liar, he said, but his pretty mouth had a greasy shine as if he'd sucked on buttered toast. The girl Ned and Isabel had watched in the checkout line at Boots looked 14 or 15, young. Her fingers were raw, the nails chewed and misshaped. Her hands were very small, and except for the fingertips, quite pale, and her arms were pale and led to the pale and hairless rest of her, there and there, or so Isabel thought. Ned thought so too. "Stand up," he said. "Turn around and let me shave you." Isabel stood. She did as she was asked. These were the days when she was up to the humiliation of being handled all for nothing. Nothing? What am I supposed to feel? Oh, fuck it, as long as you're satisfied. And you're not? He was pinching her nipple. This was an education, wasn't it? I'm sorry, she said. What for? My mother. If I didn't believe in what I was doing, Ned said, and Isabel could hear that he was smiling next to her, behind her, very close in bed. Her mother's visit had been overlong, and their routine had been necessarily shelved to accommodate a charry woman crammed with opinions but few questions. How could her mother resist Ned? But she had. Poor Mom. Her mother, in a dust-colored dress, wore a face as inviting as a rake, yet why should the woman be enthusiastic about their marriage? Her mother's drama, the generic one, replaced by a younger version of herself, rosy enough to wear red without in any way seeming menopausal. Red is menopausal after 40, her mother said. She was probably right. My mother is scary. You're nothing like her. Really? Ned was holding Isabel in the narrow bed of her girlhood, or so she imagined, and she was a girl again and barefoot on the landing, her mother down the hall in an ataraxic dark and all very quiet. The house, Isabel's, the chairs whined, "Pet me," and she ran her hand along the railings as she passed through the house, and out the back door. She was moving quickly over the impressionable lawn, and when she looked back, she saw her footprints in heavy trespass. Isabel lay on the stone bench in its ruff of thorns. The roses have a long reach. Careful. I'm being careful, he said. Sharper inhalations in her girlhood's bed. The sheets are heavy, the hour's wrong. I'm all fucked up, she says. You'll get used to it. She is already used to it. Stay with me now, Ned says, every part of her corked. Open your eyes, look at me, look at what we're doing. He is quiet above her then, and maybe it's the way he is moving. Concentrate. But she's a girl, after all. She wanders. She makes things dewy. She gets overexcited. The noise, the bed, my mother. It was that time of year, everything dying, when Isabel turned a corner and a blast of underground air at the newsstand made her sick. Isabel. She got as far as the chemist's when she rushed to the curb and bent over and spit. Something was happening to her. The doctor's assessment was that she was 2 months gone. And that explained her breasts, their feverish bloat. Ned and Isabel, after the doctor on the street, he had her arm. She knew the night it happened. Whatever bird it was outside, it sounded profound. I knew it, Isabel said to Ned. Hold on. She was startled by the street, but he knew where they were and promised to lead her toward refreshment. I don't want to make this into something it isn't, she said. But already she was remembering the granite bench and the garden, a bed and thorned and very exciting. Why not make it into something? Well then, it's a girl. Isabel was as sure of this as she was of the night it happened in the green conspiracy of Midsummer's Eve. There was an owl. The dark outside the window was not dark. There was a moon. The air was visible for all the noise in it, and they were in agreement, she and Ned, and nothing was needed beyond what they knew together, and all those fitful experiments, G and the rest, the urgency that drove them to know, and for her sake, he said, especially to experience. All they had thought necessary was not required. They'd made a girl that night. She knew. The tea in the tea shop was mauve and hard to sweeten, but the shortbread popped in her mouth like a bag of powdered sugar, and Isabel was happy for a while to look across the table at her husband, for that was what he was, Ned Bourne, her husband. I can't do this now, she said. He leaned forward to take her hand, but she pulled it away. Isabel, he said. He said it was all right. Said whatever she wanted to do, he understood. She hated him for accommodating her. The waitress came by, but there was nothing they needed. "No, wait, do you have any honey?" Ned asked. "I don't want to be sentimental," Isabel said. "Be as sentimental as you like." The honey spiraled into his tea. "I can't do this," Isabel said. Whatever she meant, he was behind her. "Easy for you." Isabel wanted to see the hyacinth macaws, the largest species of parrot and one of the stars at the London Zoo, but size aside, the color of the bird was what she wanted to see. That they mated for life made them admirable, but were they really as blue as in the photographs? Yes, 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 self-possessed and regal. She had to turn away from the birds and walk ahead. "Why are you so angry all of a sudden?" he asked. "Why am I so angry? I don't know," she said. I'm surprised at how angry I am, but I am." The bench they sat on was wet. "Damn it!" Isabel was thinking of her name, her maiden name, the name she hoped to call her professional name, Isabel Stark. Would their daughter be Stark-born? Born stark naked was on her mind when she noticed the man walking toward them. He was unsteady on his feet, more fluid than a man with bones. He was looking at Isabel, and she was looking at him when he opened his coat and his zipper was down, and Isabel saw his malicious little cock. Whatever happened, whatever she saw, whatever signage she read, the message applied. And to prove her point, Isabel stopped walking, turned, and read aloud the black hornbill's story, how the female is sealed in a tree on her nest for 3 months. Only her bill pokes through so she can be fed. "I can't," she said. "I haven't become anything yet. I'd be a black hornbill sealed in a tree," she said. "The hornbill sighting is telling me don't do it." "Don't what?" he said. "Come on." Isabel was 33 years old. Her mother was 22 when she had Isabel. Holly Mixon, her first-year roommate at Vassar, had 2 children already, and someone else from Isabel's class. Who was it? She couldn't remember. Laura, her best friend and roommate for sophomore, junior, and senior years, was in Paris, childless. They had made promises to each other, promises to be purposeful, employed, well-traveled. The well-traveled part was underway, but purposeful or employed? "Are you so entirely happy?" Isabel asked, and Ned said, "I am. I'm up for anything." Of all the nightgowns to bring, this the one ready to be torn into rags. The nightgown bundled in her lap she saw was her granny nightgown, yellowed under the sleeves, and she couldn't quite understand her decision. "Are you sure?" the doctor asked. She did all the unsightly crying things, and both men watched. She used the sleeve of her yellowed nightgown on her face. "You're in agreement?" the doctor asked. "Yes." And they said yes at the same time, so Ned and Isabel must have been in agreement. So he didn't get what her problem was. "You don't? Really? How many weeks has it been?" In truth, he couldn't remember what the doctor looked like, only Isabel with a nightgown bundled against her belly like a baby. Isabel, he remembered, and the oriental carpet in the doctor's office so old it looked black. Ned said, "Look, Stahl's done a lot for me, and he's not here for very long, and I don't want you to come if you're going to shift into remote without warning." "What?" "You know what I mean, Isabel." "You go," she said, for what had Stahl ever said to her but, "You've got a good name for a writer." Ned came home late, but was not so tired as to refuse Isabel's request. "Make love to me, please," she said. He was obliging, so the night was shorter, though she slept, and he didn't. His eyes smarted, pinpricked, as if he'd done all the crying. It hurt to close them, and he looked at the ceiling, at the wall, at the end of the bed, at the window beyond the end of the bed, and touring the room this way, he saw his jeans on the floor, stepped out of, small. He was weak. He had called Phoebe to congratulate her on her engagement. He was weak, and for all that his eyes hurt, he mustered something watery that ran into his ears. In the morning over coffee, Isabel apologized for not being up to stall. He's important, you know. Impotent? Ned said, if you could only look as if you were having fun, we might make some friends. I said I was sorry, then, do you want more milk in that? Your coffee, she said. It looks dark. Turned away from him, she was an old woman, a bone, a crone, a downwardly sloped shape, in a thin bathrobe, purposeless and derisible. Why this woman when there were so many others he might have amazed, so many he had amazed, even Phoebe, once Phoebe, especially Phoebe. I'm going to the old characters now. The Barn, Maine, 2004. Who was bleeding? Dinah asked Clive. You or me? She had found a blood stain, surely oral, on the sheets, but whose? Their wanton, close sleep. Most likely his mouth, the older, though he didn't feel any pain. You're welcome to look, he said, opening his mouth. So the day came on, another day with a sky blue enough to put the sun in its place, a sky as hard to look at as the sun, although she looked up after the incongruously sweet sound of the ospreys. Straight through the afternoon she squinted, and still she didn't see them until they were a dash, then out of sight. She wrote about the frog she had stared at the other day, the cold hysteria in his eyes, but frogs seemed too enervated for hysteria. They seemed lazy. The sound they made was a plucked string, the start of down home, delta slow. The afternoon went on, and she worked on her geraniums, all firecracker red in clay pots of different sizes, some atop an old blue box, all packed close. Maine classic. Clive was with Isabel on the bench outside the barn. Clive and Isabel have come together. The bench, once soldier blue, had faded to something like oyster, a color she liked. It did not need repainting, Dinah thought. Not yet. When the wood looked dried out and splintery, then she would paint. But here was a change she wanted to make next year, no doubt. Next year, would Isabel be in the picture? Next year, she wanted to paint the bench on the screen porch black. Eschew geraniums for a good leaf, no blossoms necessary. A part of her was sick of the drawn-out dying about the geraniums. From so little a rain as a shower, they seemed to emerge sopped and spotted, black and brown. They only looked durable. Their lives were short. What amazed her was how much she had loved them, and for so long. Her high school sweetheart, her first love, her young husband, James, Jimmy, Jimbo, card, a rhyme. Did he know she still loved him from time to time? Simply subdue them by loving them more was Dinah's tune. Endure was a word in another song. She didn't always have to be in the model's company. It was easier to lunch alone. What did Ned Bourne do for lunch? She had seen him the other day at trade winds, shucking ears of corn to check the kernels, shucking fast and looking guilty about it. She had avoided him then, glad to escape beguilement and the storm. Did Robert Lowell know how much she loved him? A bit of a bully like Clive, only madder. No, it wasn't madness in Clive. Clive wasn't mad, he was selfish, which was a fault, but a fault a person could live with. The word endure again. Ned Bourne squeezing avocados at trade winds, poking the vegetables. No, poking the meat. And you, Garcia Lorca, what were you doing down by the watermelons? Patchwork poems while she waited for Clive, who had said the tide was high at 4. She was ready to swim when he was, and he was at 4:30, which really wasn't late. Simply subdue them by loving them more was her tune. That didn't mean she had to be in the model's company. Clive knew this much, and they went to the cove alone without Isabel. Clive pushed what Dinah had set before him away. Why would you expect me to be sunny? I've never much liked anybody in the morning. I'm sorry, Dinah said, and she took up the plate of fruit she had just put before him. How would you like your eggs? Dinah jiggered vodka in her juice. Vodka, blue sky, birds. Clive was almost always nicer in the afternoon. Clive's daughter, Sally, on the telephone. Would everyone start behaving if I had cancer? Sally wants to visit. This over a late lunch that would serve as dinner, just the two of them, a picnic, a bully bread and a leather crust, and other hard food like salami and iced coffee, bitter, not bitter, and no cream to cut it, no sugar. Sally wants to visit. His response to the whistling out of nowhere speed of her announcement was no response. I miss her, Dinah said. I miss Sally. When Dinah woke from her nap, she saw the meadow had been mown. The field stones were visible again. They looked like lumpish animals in the muddy embankment, and Clive at the shed, appraising, seemed pleased with the appearance of everything, himself included, and why not? The smooth, movable parts of him, nothing caved in or stiff or dry about Clive, nothing barreled, but it was muscled, russet, warm, all worked, and the whole of him turned to her now, welcoming. Up close he smelled grassy. Was it any wonder what she did, what she had done and would do again for the attentions of this man? Years ago, Dinah had left a young husband, known long but married shortly, for this man, Clive Harris, older, but not by so many years anymore. Left a husband, a hometown, and friends for a man who openly cheated on her even then. Oh, pride was overrated. She had learned how to put it aside. Drinking a little helped, and the days when she fancied she had written a good line, which sometimes turned into a poem, and a good one at that. Does the meadow meet with your approval? Clive asked, and in asking, she knew he was sorry. Sorry about Sally, he was sorry, but he did not want to talk about his daughter. No more about Sally, please. No more. And they turned back to the long white house with the wind dropped to nothing and the wind chimes quiet. Good morning, sweetheart. Clive was not always glum. So why did she ruin the day with mention of Sally? I saw a lot of Sally in New York this spring, too much of Sally, he said. Clive said, I want to work, and his purpose was as final as a nail. Once your parents die, there is nothing between you and it. Not a new idea, but the reality has pressed against Clive's heart. Clive has had his mother on his mind. Some remorse over his own behavior toward the women in his life has Clive facing backward to where his mother left off. Would she approve? Doubtful. Your father would never, was how she reprimanded Clive when he was growing up. He sees his mother from a distance, then spends the night by her side. His mother in imposing diamonds at the Hotel greeting New Year's Eve, the passing of the year in which his father had died. Clive sat with his mother while she delivered her pronouncements on Daddy's genius, his kindness, his elegance. Such assertions had hissed past Clive's ears before, chiding, but on this one night she spoke of his father's gift for life and for loving others. Your father was a man who let things go alive. Then, with the alacrity of another new year, his mother had tucked the dead man into her clutch, only quoting him from time to time when it served instructive. Scolding Sally, your grandfather used to say only boiled and roasted joints allowed on the table. Clive thinks his mother liked to catch Sally at it so she could poke her in the elbow with a fork. In this way, Clive thinks he is more like his mother. He's a killer. The other day, he had told Isabel he would not be needing her services for a while. Poor choice of words, probably, but he was not given to lying. He had told her from the start, just as he had once told his wife, I must have full sway. I told you, Clive's onto the lily pond, Isabel said. I'm sorry, Ned said. Whatever for? Advancing across the sky, Olympian clouds promised a storm of thrilling proportion. The power might go out. Now something appropriately dramatic would happen. She asked of Ned, should I feel sorry for you? He made some helpless gesture as if a sale had not gone through or he was broke or lost, unable to answer. Yeah, no, I don't know. He tried to explain to her as much as to himself that Phoebe was making her summer rounds. How did he feel about this, Isabel wanted to know. Do you want to figure more prominently in her life? Just when they were on to an important topic, the phone rang and she knew it was Clive. Before Ned even spoke, she knew from his expression of complicit exasperation that Clive had asked Ned if he might speak to her. No, Ned said, delightedly. Ned looked at Isabel and lied about her whereabouts, and all the time he was talking, Isabel didn't signal for the phone, but watched Ned and wondered why was he so sure this is what she wanted him to do when she didn't know what she wanted Ned to do, or Clive to do for that matter. Thanks a lot, she said. Ned said, I really didn't think you'd want to speak to him. I'm sorry, Ned said, and he sounded quite genuinely sorry. It made her sorry, sorrier and sadder. It's all right, she said. I didn't want to speak to him. But she wasn't sure if what she said was true. She was also thinking of Phoebe. Now that we're in Maine, Ned began, it might be fun. But he had no need of finishing when he saw Isabel's expression. God knows he wanted to be hopeful himself. We should read the Odyssey together. The epic belongs to beautiful women. Odysseus visits the underworld and is witness to a parade of them, a great loveliness of ghosts with stories of ravishment, fleet suns, and sorrow. The barn is preternaturally white before the storm. Her warm sides heave, bovine and alive, patient. Clive gestures towards the house and Dinah moves. She feels afraid of the storm, but also dreamy. The grass is very green and squeaks underfoot, and all the while Clive is nudging her forward to the house and up the stairs. Love. She is also afraid how she must look, the dull hair, her hair, all this way and that, flat patches, a child's morning hairdo, the nut-sized scalp and skull, and the scalp shows through. Terrible thoughts when he means only to please her, and she is pleased and feels purely lucky to be touched. Why are you crying? Clive asks. Any number of reasons. I'll squeeze it out of you, whatever it is, Clive says. Thank you.